Well, hello, everybody. Oh, my name is John Barnwell, and I'm here with my best friend and greatest teacher, and greatest pupil, Dr. Douglas Gabriel, Esoteric extraordinaire. And so I've had the good fortune of knowing him for between 45 and 50 years. We've conferred over the years regarding all matters pertaining to the path of the great I am. And that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so we wish to be delicate regarding other people's views in the matter, of course. But we're going to venture forward with Dr. Gabriel, continuing on from his development through training in exorcism by the Catholic Church, and then in the military intelligence and NSA with the government. And if, of course, he wants to touch back on any of those to fill out a story, we're more than happy to listen. But today we're going to enter into the world of metaphysics as it was perceived in the early days. Douglas, how are you?
I'm very good, John. And these interviews are going very successful. And I will dip back to answer a couple questions. Somebody said, when you were in the NSA, how many NDAs did you have to sign, non-disclosure agreements? And I bet you're not telling us the really secret best parts. Well, I'm not telling you some of the horrible parts. That's true. And we didn't sign NDAs. We signed security agreements. Some of them literally had $1 million fines and 10, 20 years in jail. I signed about 10 of those or so as I went up the ranks. So yeah, I would have gone to jail forever and couldn't have never paid back the debt if I ever gave out one of the secrets.
Yeah, but isn't there also like a 35-year time frame on some of those?
Well, for certain top secret security, it's only 5, but
Yeah.
for others, it's longer. So let me just point out how that worked. Some years after I was out, I was getting ready to go to Berlin because that was my, as you heard, my assignment that I was given at first from NSA, and I turned it down for Shimmy, Alaska, and I wanted to go to Berlin. And I'd been traveling around Europe a few times. I had a Eurail pass, but I had to buy a ticket through East Berlin because the Eurail pass didn't go through East Berlin. So I buy the ticket. I get on the train. I'm sitting there, and some young man sits down next to me with a backpack. And he looks very serious, and he looks right at me and says, "Specialists, remember your security agreement. You can't go into Iron Curtain countries." And I'm like, okay, somebody's following me. And this guy was so serious that I just took what he said to be the truth. I got off that train. I went over. I got so scared. I took my backpack and I threw it into some bushes and went over there and acted like I'd been hanging around for a long time. All these people, because I was going to wait till the train took off, or I don't know what was on my mind. Police showed up, military police showed up, and people just in normal dress showed up. Went on. I could see through the train window. They went in. They grabbed this dude, threw him to the ground, searched him, searched his backpack, pulled him off the train, and went off with him. And I'm like, okay, that kind of taught me that I guess once you're in, you're never out.
There, but for the grace of God, go I.
So anyway, I wanted to just say that because there are some great remarks that are coming out underneath these that we're posting on the YouTube site. And so many of them I can't go into. And it is true, there's many things I can't say. And today there will be names I have to give different names for, because some of those people's families are still around. And what you're going to hear today is going to probably shock you in many cases. And I don't want their family to receive the repercussions of that. It's cathartic enough for me just to talk about it, and let alone if somebody pops up and says, "Did your mom really support Keith Reinhardt, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Mark Prophet, and Walter Russell?" And they'll go, "What are you talking about? We're one of the most upstanding families in Wilmington, and how could you say such a thing?" So I have to be a little careful with some of that.
Okay. Well, people out there, most of the people watching this, I'm sure, know that Douglas and I both worked at Mayflower Bookshop. I was the manager through the late 70s into the early 80s. And then when I left, Douglas came in and took over my spot. Of course, we had been friends for years before that. And so there's many different types of esoteric books that would come through the store with all different organizations. And we've talked about many of those. But from what I hear, Douglas wants to share some things from the early days regarding some of the influences he had that swirl around the concept of the masters of wisdom and the harmonization of sensations and feeling and will. So without further ado, let's let Douglas roll it out.
Yes, I think my life has just been, I've been pushed down the path of destiny. And every time someone said to me, "Oh, Douglas, there's someone I want you to meet," trouble started. So anyway, I'm just want to make a few things clear. This isn't a transition from talking about being an exorcist to being a healer, but in fact, I found out that a lot of healing is casting out of obsessions, casting out of astral specters, phantoms, demons, all kinds of things. And so really healing, as you've heard in the prior talks, I was exposed to a lot of healers. Those were faith healers. But when I left Shemia and went back to Fort Devens, I didn't tell you what really happened. And so someone had asked some very insightful questions. And so I think the only way to answer them is to say the following. I have been sick all my life, but after Shemia, I started having all these tumors grow, and they're nasty. When they start growing, as you full well know, how it used to be. You could always beat me in a martial arts contest because you knew that I had these bumps. All you had to do was touch one of them, and I'd drop to the ground with pain, right? And so I'm trying to get rid of those, right? So I was looking around for that. But anyway, one day I'm standing in my apartment because I'm now a lead teacher at Fort Devens, teaching the same stuff I did in Alaska to the NSA people from all the different branches. And I dropped to the floor. And I, of course, vomit, and I start feeling these types of vertigo, which now I know there are. I used to think there was only 3 or 4 types. There's 9 layers of vertigo you can have. I mentioned this earlier. When I was a child, sometimes this would happen. I'd just be playing along, and then all of a sudden, I'd feel the sun. I'd feel its motion. I'd feel the Earth's motion. I'd get sick. I'd vomit, and I'd drop to the ground and lay there for some time and get a migraine headache. So I had all these problems. Now, I also had to think, well, are these tumors, which now I have hundreds of them, are these tumors because I helped Father William in exorcisms? And so I wonder when I reflect back upon these things. But what happened was when I fell to the ground, it wasn't the first time, but I eventually saw what people during the Jesus Restoration movement would call, I saw the white light, and the white light introduced me to Jesus. And so we've come to your coffee house, and God told us, you're going to tell us what happened to us. Well, that is exactly the experience of Damascus with Paul. And it's a very common experience when people, for some reason, get knocked across the threshold, pulled across the threshold, or take too many drugs. In many cases, in the old days, in the coffee houses, we dealt with people who had drug overdoses, but they didn't die because they said the white light and Jesus came to them. The white light is very true. It's like effulgent light, but it's far beyond light. It's a healing ocean of cosmic ether, water, light, sound, and the cosmic word all combined in one. And so it rolled up over the top of me, and I'm thinking, wait a second, this is like meeting Jesus Christ. What is this? I didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the Upanishads, the ancient Hindu scripture, describes it as 10,000 times brighter than the sun.
That's exactly what it was. And like Paul, he had to turn his head to the ground. He couldn't look at it. Same with me. So when they say the seeing eye of God is so bright that it'll blind you, well, yeah, so is the sun. But this is something totally different. So it rolled up on me, and this lasted for days. I couldn't move for days. And my whole life was then shown to me in backwards order, exactly as we've talked about in so many other talks. And eventually, I was able to sense Jesus Christ as a living being in the far distance. Somehow I thought that this light was the hem of Christ's garment. That's what I came out thinking. It didn't say that to me, but that's what I came out thinking. But during that, experience, it left me with a number of impressions, future impressions. And one of them was I heard the creative word say to me, find the Christian navigators. Now, John, have I ever told you this story? Do you know what a Christian navigator is?
There's a lot, there's a lot I could say about it, but we'd be delving into French Hermetic tradition with the whole idea of the navigateur and that designation that's honorific and within certain esoteric orders. Not ones that I'm particularly aligned with, mind you, just I happen to be aware of a lot of things.
Well, this was a Christian version of the navigators. And they basically got together military people who always, in the military, your whole job is to hurry up and then wait. So most of your time you're waiting. That's my job up in Alaska at the end, was doing nothing but sitting around reading. So I always kept a book in my back pocket, and I was always reading creatively all the time. All this new spiritual stuff that especially people would assign me to study and say, figure this out for me, would you? And so I was told, find the Christian navigator. So right after that, on a bulletin board at Fort Devens in the Post, I saw an invitation to come to the Christian navigators healing thing meeting or whatever. So I went and met them, and they were wonderful people, and they took me all over the place, but they introduced me to some things I had never knew anything about. One of them was basically that in Boston, which was near Fitchburg, Fort Devens, which was near Fitchburg, Massachusetts, we could go into Boston on the bus every weekend. So I went in, and they had showed me that they get a lot of their Christian scriptures, which that group, the Christian navigators, went around evangelizing to people, trying to get them to be saved, as it were. So I memorized lots of Bible passages, had a great time with them, but they turned me on to Mary Baker Eddy's church, the First Church of Christian Science, Christ Scientist, or what's called Christian Science now. And they have the mother church there. Of course, Mary Baker Eddy had long passed, but I got into that, and they have fantastic healers. It's a church that trains you to heal based upon Christian scriptures, laying on of hands, proper diet, and the things I've talked about before that any exorcist should do if they wish to heal anyone.
Yeah, mind you, we made mention of this before, but in case you haven't caught the earlier episodes, but if you really study the history of early Christianity, they really looked upon themselves as hospitals dealing with healing and exorcism. So this is the central core of the early Christian impulse.
Totally. And you know that because you're a Templar. And the Templars became the Hospitallers. And they literally took care of the pilgrims who might be hurt or sick along the pilgrimage path from Europe into Jerusalem. So anyway, I loved the Christian Scientists, and I loved what they did. I became a member, and they trained me in their healing school, and that was all good. But they were also into good health. So they told me about Anne Wigmore. So I went over to Anne Wigmore's house. And so I knocked on the door. Anne Wigmore answered. And I'm like, you're Anne Wigmore? And she goes, yeah, who are you? Come in. You need a smoothie. So she went in and took some rotted wheat berry juice called Rejuvelac and mixed it up with a bunch of fresh vegetables and gave me this horrible thing to drink and said, this will heal you. And I didn't even tell her I was there to be healed. Anyway, she became a fast friend. I stayed at her house, went through her training. And eventually, many years later, through our dear friend Bobby Hankins, who was Anne Wigmore loved Bobby. I mean, she loved him. I think she wanted to marry Bobby. But anyway, and then out here in Michigan, we have Creative Health Institute, one of the few places that you can do the Hippocrates Health Institute live food, wheatgrass diet. Now, if you ever drank wheatgrass, it's good on the first time. After that, it's like drinking something horrible.
Yeah, you have Viktoras Kovinskas, who became the head of that particular movement, and he has a big center down in Florida. An old friend of mine is one of the people that runs that place. But you have to keep in mind that Anne Wigmore had gray hair, okay? And she got into her wheatgrass cure, and her hair turned black again. So that's just to give you a little context of how powerful wheatgrass can be, and in ways unexpected.
Oh, yes. She broke both of her legs when she was young, and she had watched animals eating grass. And she was so dadgum poor that literally, when no one was tending her, they just put her out on the grass and she just scooted around eating grass and squeezing it onto her massive wounds that they said they were going to have to cut her legs off. And she says, "No, I'm not going to let you do that." So she healed herself by eating grass. And then she realized that this was enzymes. She became a naturopathic doctor. She became all these different things. But she was a wonderful, wonderful person. And that you don't cook anything; it's all raw. So I started eating an orange, and in those days, we believed that whole foods was right. So we'd eat the whole orange. Remember when I used to take an apple, eat the whole apple, the core, the seeds, and you'd say, "But there's cyanide in there," or what is it? No, some poison. I said, "I don't care. It's all part of the whole thing." So she taught me that, but I couldn't do that. I was in the military. I couldn't stay on that diet. So I then heard about on another part in another part of Boston. All these things were in Boston, in Brookline. This was, and it was rumored about that this was the best place to go eat. You know where I'm going to tell you and who I'm going to mention next? Of course, Michio Kushi and his wife, Aveline. So I went there, met them, thought it was really cool, went into their program, got trained. I didn't get certified, but I chopped a lot of vegetables for those people. And for years afterwards, because I was a vegetarian, uh, oh, by the way, that when I fell down to the ground and had that experience, I could not eat meat anymore for like 35 years or something. No milk, no cheese. I wouldn't wear leather. I'd look at this stuff and I'd say, "No, that's my brother. I'm not going to eat my brother, the cow." And I couldn't help it. There wasn't a mental decision. It was like, I couldn't put it in my mouth, just like I never could drink alcohol. As you know, you once convinced me to drink the best beer in the world, Harp, and for a while I was able to drink a few Harps, but that's about it. My whole life, no alcohol, no smoking, or I couldn't handle it because I was too much of a weak constitution. So I kept trying to heal myself. So tried to heal myself with Ann Wigmore. And I can say that I've sent many people to Creative Health Institute who went there with terminal cancer and came out healed. At the Mayflower, we used to recommend it all the time. People call, they have an illness, go to Creative Health Institute here in Michigan, Union City. So then I met, of course, Michio Kushi, read his books, found him to be just utterly fascinating, loved his wife, and I would go there all the time, did training with them. But eventually, it wasn't my bag. I didn't really like some of that nasty seaweed. And I didn't believe in eating fish, and they believed in eating two types of fish. And I said, "No, I'm not going to eat no fish." But I took up a lot of their habits and built that into this. And then that added to my toolkit of what I could help people with in terms of when they'd say, they're sick or they have this problem, whatever. I'd say, "Well, have you ever tried blah, blah, blah?" And many of these people did go off and get healed. Did it heal me? No. The tumors continue to grow to this day. So we know that there's types that can be healed. There's types that can't be healed. And though I have, even with Dascalus, I mean, I've been saved from the edge of death many times. You and Barbara sent my picture to Dascalus. He prayed over it and boom, bang. You can't believe what I recovered from that time. It was completely different illness. So I have all these strange experiences because I was first off trained as an exorcist. So I love the paranormal. And then I was basically training to be like a nutritionalist for my own sake. And then I was into all the alternative everythings to see if any of those would work. You can hardly name one of the old therapies, one of the old alternative therapies I haven't tried. So in Boston, and I wanted to say this about Boston and the area and what happened to me there before we go down to Fort Bragg, which we started on that story even a couple sessions back. But I'm sure you have something to add about those experiences.
Well, I do want to chime in a little bit in reference to Dascalos because he's so very special. And there's 3 Christian initiates that were active in the 20th century that are near and dear to my heart. Most of you, of course, know that Rudolf Steiner is really the core of the teachings that I attempt to decipher. But then there's also Stylianos Teslis, who's a Cypriot initiate who passed away not too many years ago, who went by the name Dascalos. And there was a couple of books written about him. They're a little Some people say they're a little exaggerated, but definitely he was a true Christian initiate. And it's interesting. There's also Peter Dunov, who was in Bulgaria, and he taught a system of dance similar to Rudolf Steiner's Eurythmy, and but he's also known as Bensaduno.
Mhm.
And he actually had an active center down in Florida, in Tampa, and came here. He studied to be a Methodist, by the way, so it was his entry into it. And then he ended up writing his thesis on the Goths, the Goths of Northern Europe and their early history. But I don't want to run away with the story here. It's also fascinating to me. But Daskalos, yes, we sent a picture of Douglas to Daskalos, and Douglas was sure he was at the end of his journey, and miraculously, that drama moved into another phase, more of a tragic comedy.
Right, a healing to go into another phase of weird illness, strange illnesses that no one even understands. Matter of fact, if someone's going to ask me, okay, what kind of tumors are these? I'm going to tell you, and it won't do you much good. It's called acoustic neurofibromatosis 2, angiolipomedullarosis. So if you want to try to figure that one out, good luck. The doctors can't figure it out. Now, Daskalos' one of his top students was Paul Scorpin. Tyler brought Paul Scorpin to Detroit and took us through this initiation, basically, to learn how to do the type of healing that Daskalos did. And it was amazing. But Daskalos was unparalleled. He was a true master, according to what I can see in reading his books, even his secret book. And he would sit there, and in his spare time, Paul said he would gather together light from his own body, turn it into a ball of light, one color or another, and just push it up into the corner of his healing room. And when people would come in, he'd look at them and he'd go, "Oh, I know what you need." And he'd pull down one of the colored balls and put it into their body to heal them. Okay, now I don't know anybody who's done that, but Paul witnessed it, untold amounts of time, and was very, very close to Daskalos. So yes, it's this question of, is all faith healing an exorcism? It's a very good question. I don't think people are possessed just because they're ill. They may have things they carried over from past incarnations, or they may have certain astral obsessions, or they may have had certain, let's say they ate the wrong thing. I've had, the creative word has told me sometimes to walk up to somebody and say, "Do you mind if I tell you what God just told me?" And they look at me like I was insane. And I'd say, "Can I touch your body?" And I touch their liver and say, "Yeah, it's true. If you drink anymore, it's going to kill you." Now, and then, I tell them something very specific about their life no one could know, and that they needed to do this or else they were going to die, or that they had cancer in that organ or whatever, so that they might get some help and might not die. Because I have been at the moment of death with so many people. I literally don't know how many, but when I was in Hawaii, there were like 3 or 4 people that they'd wreck out on the road right by my office when I was the principal there. And I'd run out and give them artificial respiration until the ambulance came. And so they'd come by every year and thank me, take me out to dinner, because they said I saved their life. Well, we used to live in a house where on the corner there was a wreck where people would die regularly. It was just a regular thing when I was very, very young. My dad, who knew first aid, would go out there again and again. We'd stand back and watch it. But there's just all the time, if you're going to be used by the Spirit, you better be ready, because it's not going to be nice. It's not going to be a path down the primrose garden. No, if you're going to see heaven, you're probably going to be shown hell first. I just want to emphasize this. So if somebody thinks, "Oh, isn't it glamorous? He's an exorcist. Isn't that cool?" No, it is not cool at all. And if you do it wrong, it can kill you. And who knows, your impurities probably bounce back on you and create illness. So I've assumed either that it was the EMFs from being in these rooms with the NSA, or it was from the working with Father William with the exorcisms or whatever that caused a lot of these things to come to birth, especially these tumor things.
Yeah, and for those of you that perhaps don't know, but the much maligned Count Cagliostro, when he was in Paris, he would literally have 1,000 people lined up to see him. And he would see as many as he could before he went on to his other activities. But you get that with the certain of the teachers within the esoteric stream. If you go into the Rosicrucian writings, they're told that to keep it, it's like it's private. You don't tell people what you're doing. If people ask you what you're doing, that you're a healer and you do it.
Yes, you do it for gratis. Yeah. Rosicrucians.
But I might as well add that in this wonderful series of 4 lectures by Rudolf Steiner, there was an earlier edition by Harry Collison, and there's a current edition. Of course, they keep changing titles of things, so it's hard to fill out your collection. But in there, he makes the point is that individuals without conscience in the after-death state get stuck being kind of a and catastrophe. So you really want to have a conscience, I guess, and that plays in that whole the exorcism and healing and all. They go hand in hand because you have the super sensible aspect of any particular healing issue, and then you have the manifestations of personal karma, and there's also things into something, maybe on a mass scale. You were on a big ship with a whole bunch of people, and so it isn't so personal for you. And so karma is a very complex subject, and I consider Douglas to be an expert in a certain regard, especially towards the healing aspects relating to it. So this is great to be able to have this conversation.
Yeah, because I've been doing this for a long time, and I always do it for free. Because as you said, the Rosicrucians need to dress in the garb of the local people, speak their language, and basically be all things to all people. But you work gratis for free as a healer, and really, that's what you need to be. Everybody needs to be that. They need to be creating an art of life, which Michio Kushi taught. And the art of life is a healing life. And that means when they come to your house, you're healing them with your food, with your presence, with gardening, whatever. So anyway, let's jump from Boston and let's jump down to Fort Bragg. I mentioned in a previous talk that when I got there, I met my double, or what they call the double. It's not really the double. It's another person who looks and thinks like you, who can't be, I think, in the same exact spot with you at the same time. That's my theory. Of course, I got a lot of theories, haven't proven them. So that's the reason that you and I, after the last show, we talked, I mentioned like 5 of those times. And I'm with people who were so close to me that there's no way, I kept saying to them, there's no way that person could look like me, talk like me, said the same things. It's not possible. No, it's happened, and it's happened repeatedly. So I walk into the barracks. Oh, by the way, at that point, I was what was called a specialist first class, which is, I think, an E6. And in the end, I ended up being an E7. Every time I do something new or they'd give me some stupid, crazy assignment, they'd give me a promotion, right? But a specialist, nobody cares about a specialist. They wouldn't even know what that meant when they see a specialist. Those are for signal intelligence, nuclear stuff, all this secret stuff. So anyway, I walk in the barracks, and out the back door goes a guy who looked exactly like me, talked exactly like me, blah, blah, blah. And then everyone was so blown away. So the next day, this young man named Blount was his last name. He says, dude, I have to introduce you to my mother. And it's like, what? Never heard that one before. Okay, you're going to introduce me to your mother. Why? She will have to meet you. She will have to meet you. You and her are, I don't know, we were chatting or whatever, and he just said that. So anyway, he introduced me to his mother. Her name is Joanne Devon, but she's long passed. Of course, she was older, much older than me at the time, way older. And she introduced me to these lessons that she had, stacks of them, from the Summit Lighthouse, from the Aquarian Foundation, and the secret lessons of Walter Russell. And I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. I've never seen anything like this. I'd seen Amoric and these kind of things. And I was, of course, looking for Rudolf Steiner. So I literally ate those up. I spent every spare second I had reading through all that stuff, and it blew me away. And she goes, well, if you really believe that this is real stuff, I'm going to introduce you to the lady behind all of this. And I said, oh, great. I want to meet her. So we went to Myrtle Beach, and she had this monstrous house on the beach. And she was filthy rich, by the way. And she was the sponsor. Her name was Ellen. I use the name Ellen because if you hear this story, you could figure out who she is. And I really don't want you to figure out who she is because she's from a very wealthy family that is still very powerful in Wilmington. But anyway, Ellen, when she met me, was instantaneously convinced I was Saint Germain. I hadn't been there half a day, and she goes, "You're Saint Germain. Finally, I get to meet Saint Germain."
Are you sure she didn't mean Saint Bernard?
Well, I didn't have the thing under my neck, the brandy. So, but now, why would she say that? Because she was the money that supported Mark Prophet. Mark Prophet, after Blavatsky, wrote books on the masters of the East and then said that he was connected to all the ascended masters, Saint Germain, Kutumi, Moria, all of them. He was all of them. And he was like, he gives out 12 of his incarnations, I think. And he was everybody important, according to him. And so he wrote a beautiful book, though, a number of beautiful books, one called Climb the Highest Mountain. And he started the Summit Lighthouse. And she was the main money behind that. Well, I think about a dozen years before he died, he met a woman standing on the street corner, and her name was Elizabeth Wolfe, or Elizabeth Clare Prophet, or as we like to call her, Elizabeth Clear Prophet, because she's totally focused on plagiarizing and capitalizing on that. But anyway, Mark fell in love with her, and they got married. And for the next 12 years, as he was getting quite old, she absorbed all of this and pretty soon thought that she was channeling all those beings. When he died, he became an ascended master. What's his name? Lanello, which was a mix of a couple of his incarnation names glued together. And so he became the ascended master, Lanello. And Elizabeth Clare Prophet, just a couple years afterwards, changed it from the Summit Lighthouse to the Church Universal and Triumphant, I think it's called. And she channeled her ex-husband, Mark Prophet, Lanello, Saint Germain, Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, you name it, she said she channeled him. Okay. Well, this lady, Ellen, had practically a castle on an island in a river in Wilmington. And I would go up there and stay with her because she had a fantastic library of all this stuff and everything that Joanne Devon had, all those secret lessons. She had that and much, 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 much more. I think I might have mentioned that she had pictures and videos and all this stuff. Why? Because she paid for it. She was the number one donor to not only Mark Prophet, and then to Keith Reinhardt, who I'll mention in a minute, but she did not like Elizabeth Clare Prophet and thought that she was a fraud. Now, Ellen thought, the donor lady, the philanthropist, that Mark Prophet was telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Well, I showed her the books of, what's the guy's name? Spalding, who wrote the Secret Teachings of the Masters of the Far East.
Baird Spalding.
She didn't have those books. And she looked at them and she went, "This is Mark's first book." I went, "Yeah, that's Mark's first book. Mark didn't make that up." And then I showed her some other books that she didn't have in her library or told her about them. She got them. And then see, it's right here. They plagiarized. And not only that, what did they tell you that was of any substance? I've read the secret papers of the Summit Lighthouse. Like in the old days, if you were a spiritual teacher, you put out your book, you did public lectures to draw people in, and then you had your secret teachings, which people had to pay for. That's true with almost all those old groups. Except for Steiner, I'm not sure you had to pay for the newsletter. But anyway, so they had the secret teachings. So to get into the secret teachings, you had to pay a bunch of money. So she had done that. She introduced me. She brought Elizabeth Clare Prophet because Elizabeth Clare Prophet had moved away from where they were. I think it was Washington or something. So she didn't come see Ellen anymore. Ellen didn't like her. So she said, "I want you to meet her." And didn't tell me she hated her. I met her, and afterwards she says, "What do you think of this person?" I said, She's a complete fraud. She's not clairvoyant at all. She wouldn't know clairvoyance if it bit her in the butt. So Ellen said, that's exactly what I thought. Now, let me give you a little picture of Ellen. First time I met her, not only did she say I was Saint Germain, she went over to the closet and pulled out these trays of gems. The gems had supposedly popped out of the mouth of Keith Reinhardt, the head of the Aquarian Foundation, because he was most amazing psychic probably in history. But they would pop out of his eyes, out of his nose, out of his mouth, out of his ears, pop out of his hands, and then she'd pay thousands of dollars for them. She literally had millions of dollars worth of apported, A-P-P-O-R-T. He might have invented that word, but he called it the Eucharist of the gems and all these other crazy things. So she had to get into this secret club with Keith Reinhardt. She had all of these things. And so she pulled them out and showed them to me. And I'm looking at these going, she got ripped off. These are fake. I could touch a stone to my teeth still can and tell you if it's real glass or not. I don't know why that works, but I can. I don't have to use clairvoyance. I can almost taste it, and I can also hear them. I didn't want to tell her these were all fake, right? Matter of fact, I'd even see the diamond cutter's marks on them, showing, and I knew exactly where they came from. They came from Amsterdam, from a certain place. So I knew part of Keith's thing was completely fake. Well, Elizabeth Clear Prophet met me, and she wanted to marry me instantaneously. She thought I was going to be like Mark Prophet meeting her. She was going to meet a real clairvoyant who Ellen thought was Saint Germain. That was good enough for her. That means Ellen's money would come with me. And Ellen was saying, yeah, I don't want you really associating with Ellen, with Elizabeth, especially since you just told me she's a fraud. She's a fake. I said, yeah, you're right. I don't want to really associate with her. Later, I went out to Montana and saw her in her celestial city. And again, she begged me to join her in the group and said, this time I don't have to marry her, but she'll claim that I am the Saint Germain reincarnated, blah, 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 blah. Well, I was just doing that for fun. I also met Keith Reinhardt when he got out of prison. But anyway, go back to Ellen. Ellen shows me these things. I'm realizing they're fake. She's got a rifle in the corner. She always had a rifle cocked in the corner. If anyone tried to steal her jewels, she was really old, but I'm sure she was a very good shot. So we sit down and she goes, well, because I read the tarot at the time. That's the way I created a barrier between my psychic insight. I'd lay out the cards and then I'd give them a reading, right? And I'd tell them what God told me without having to go through all that rigmarole. So she says, I know you read cards, but do you read palms? I said, no, I don't read palms. She goes, oh, good. Watch this. She takes my hand, meditates on it, asks me to get into a meditative state. And then all of a sudden, shockingly, without telling me, she whacks my hand so dadgum hard, it really, really, really hurt. And she goes, let the pain teach you. Stare at your hand. I stare at my hand, and the pain goes away in a second. I went, oh, my Lord. Does this line mean this? Does this line mean this? And she goes, yes. From that moment on, I've been able to read palms, never read a book on it. But anyway, that's the kind of person, because she had associated with Keith Reinhardt, who was so bizarre. But anyway, the channeling of the masters, what's that about? Is this a possession by demonic beings claiming to be higher beings? Yeah. It's Luciferism. And those people who do that, what do they always do? They charge for money for it. They use it to get sex. They use it to get power, position, so on and so forth. So here I am saying to Ellen, okay, this Keith Reinhardt guy, she starts telling me about him because of the stones. And she goes, oh, yes. Oh, I'd read the Aquarian Foundation. Keith Reinhardt created the Aquarian Foundation. And he, too, those were all secret papers that you had to pay pretty much a fortune for to get into. Joanne had a lot of money. So did Ellen. They paid a fortune for those things. I got to read them all for free, even though they swore they weren't supposed to show them to anybody. But at that time, Keith Reinhardt was in prison for, in Washington, D.C., homosexuality was called sodomy, and it was punishable for five years in prison. He was locked up for 5 years. Just so happens, Mark Prophet had died 2 years before I met Ellen. And 1 year before I met Ellen, Elizabeth Clare Prophet decided to start a new branch at Summit Lighthouse. And I believe it was a couple of years, almost the same time as Mark Prophet died, Keith Reinhardt went into prison. So here you have Ellen, frustrated as can be, because she thinks she's been channeled the master's teachings to her for years and years and years. And so she now has no Mark Prophet. She doesn't like Elizabeth, and Keith is locked up. So she's begging me to take on the mantle for either the Aquarian Foundation, the old Summit Lighthouse, or we'll create a new thing right here in my place in this. She lived on a really cool island, and she had another island that had a separate house in it that was nothing was on the island but her big ass mansion. Oh, her big mansion. So it was all set up. I could have said, yeah, I'm the Saint Germain, you know I am. I can channel whatever you want. No, I couldn't do that because of what you just mentioned. I have a conscience. I couldn't lie, and I couldn't, because I get instant karma. If I do something bad, boom, usually rebounds on me very, very quickly. So I became fast friends with Ellen. And so she showed me all these videos she had. Now, let me explain Keith Reinhardt. Keith Reinhardt is probably the scariest psychic in human history. He is the number one most filmed psychic. Every single, what do you call it? The busters who go and bust people, the charlatan busters. They all went. They all tried. I saw all the films. Some of these made it onto television, and they were trying to bust Keith Reinhardt, and they couldn't. This is how scary it is. Okay, if you're in the inner group, to get into the inner group, they'll show you videos of him doing this. Okay, the videos, they actually took pictures of some of this, and they took pictures of the ectoplasm coming out of his nose, his mouth, his ears, or out of his palms. He'd go into what was called the prayer closet, which the Bible tells you, go into your closet, your prayer closet. He'd pull the black curtain. He'd sit in a chair, go into some kind of trance. You'd start to see ectoplasm, this white, luminous, see-through kind of, it's hard to explain. It's like explaining what the spirit looks like. It comes out, and it literally, right in front of this, would form into Saint Germain, and it would speak to you. And you'd go. So I saw films of this. I never saw it in person, but I did meet him in person. But he had lost all of his talents, by all those skills, or whatever you call them, by then. But anyway, which was many years later. So I'd look at these and I go, wow, that's really hard to fake. Okay. And then it would be whoever you wanted. It could be Katumi. It could be Master Dwell Cool. It could be whoever you wanted. And then if you had paid more money, you didn't just get to sit in the audience. You got to go up and walk, get in a line and go in front of the thing. He'd open the curtain, and the ectoplasm would go back inside and be near his body, and you'd ask your question, and he would become the answer. So if you were asking about it, someone who had passed on, he'd become that person and give you a message. And I saw films of this, okay? And everyone who had this experience was shaken to their core. But then he got carried away, and he had to charge more money for it, right? So instead of just money for the private lessons, he charged for the apported jewels that would pop. These a bunch of, I got a bunch of them myself. I know what they cost. I know where they come from. And he basically made her believe, and all the others, that they were getting these priceless jewels, specially sent to them by a special master. And I saw films of this, and it was, I don't know how anyone could have faked this, but some of them, I know how he might have faked them. He'd open up his lip, and he'd show you pulling it right out of here, right out of his gum. Now, maybe he had it in his mouth. How do you have a big crystal this big come out of your ear? They show the ear, they show a close-up of it, and it starts to come out, and he pulls it out. I don't know how you do that. But the point is, he was so shockingly telekinetic that it was just, I can see why people believed in him. He had his secret teachings, his secret group. He started a little church. They all start their own churches, right? And of course, they all tell you who their previous incarnations were, and he had a whole list of who he was, and blah blah blah. So she would beg me to go do this, and I'd say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And I couldn't tell her they were fake. I could not tell her. And now her family has probably inherited them, thinking they're worth millions of dollars. Well, I don't know if they would. If they took him to a jeweler, the jeweler could tell him. The point is, it was a fraud. Many years later, when I was in Seattle, I had heard that he was out of prison, not many years later, but some years later. Matter of fact, he might have been in for more than 5 years. Yeah, that's right. He got into big trouble when he was in prison. He was in there for some time and almost killed him. So I was in Seattle. I found out he was around because I looked up the Aquarian Foundation Church, I think, and then they said he's alive. So I sent him a message that Ellen, I was a friend of Ellen's, blah 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 blah, with her real name. So he met with me a few times. He was no longer clairvoyant at all, and he was just a beaten man. They had beaten him in prison so bad, and I asked him detailed questions. Look, I've seen all the films and blah blah blah. Do you do that anymore? How do you do it? Oh, he just danced around. He would never answer a straight question. And if you look at his teachings, it was always the same. People would say, well, Saint Germain in your incarnation, when you did this, oh no, he wouldn't answer. He'd never answer a straight question, but he had, not nice, fluffy, luciferic. Now, was he possessed? Obviously he was, of some sort. Not when I met him. He was just a nice old man broken to pieces. Like when I met Manly P. Hall, he was taking his last breaths.
Well, you get that. And if you check out, for example, occult movements of the 19th century, which is a lecture cycle by Rudolf Steiner, he talks about the chicanery that Madame Blavatsky went through, and the incident with John King was said to be the spirit of a pirate, a famous pirate, and that Rudolf Steiner said that he wasn't that at all, that it was, but it was somebody, it was an apparition that was appearing from a secret American group of occultists. And so you get all these machinations and you get these manipulations. And so that you want to keep in mind, like what we keep reiterating, that it has to do your capacity to be able to move into the supersensible is built out of your own subjective experience, and it can come into relationship with an objective reality, and things can make appearance, but it's based on what you have developed to give forth. Now, some people have that as when they're born because of previous incarnations, or they develop it through certain techniques, like in Knowledge of Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner. But then there are also cases of aberrations, shall we say. And so we're trying to help make distinctions for people so that they can look at these things perhaps more clearly.
Well said. And it's important to remember that, because karma, you always pay for what you get, one way or the other. I don't know. That's probably not the best way to say that. But the point is that if you don't have a conscience, oh, well, you can become Luciferic possessed in a moment. But if you have a conscience, you can't lie to people. Remember, these are all big, fat, friggin' lies. Okay? Saint Germain did not come down into his ectoplasm. And Elizabeth Clare Prophet, I love it with the Summit Lighthouse. When I went out there, I went to some of her classes. She goes, oh, I'm giving this great talk today, a master class on the blah, blah, blah. Please come. And I go in and they pass out little polished stones that cost like 50 cents a piece. Just little silica stones, little this colored, some of them fake colored, and she passes them out telling them they're magic stones, and that they build up their stone collection as they go to more and more classes from her. And it's like, oh, how sappy. This is a mix of Mark Prophet and Keith Reinhardt, a very bad mix. And so anyway, in that library, Ellen's library. And in the old days, we didn't have the internet. I'd been trying to find Rudolf Steiner books since I had read about him when I was up in Alaska, and I still hadn't found them. We'll go back to that in a minute. But in her library was everything except Steiner. One of my first questions, do you have any Rudolf Steiner books? No, she never heard of Rudolf Steiner. But she had Walter Russell's books, the man who wrote back in the 40s, early on, The Universal One of the most significant books I've ever seen in print. He wrote many books, but when he was 77, he married a nice young lady who was much, 30 years younger than him or more. And she changed her name to Lau Russell, right? Well, she, with Walter, who was already a genius, he was a master painter, master sculptor, he was a polymath. He was his works were famous. He's part of the University of, what was it called? The University of Science and Philosophy. You can tell the audience about all the many friends that he hung out with, but he and Lau found a place called Swannanoa, which was one of the old robber barons' gigantic mansions. And so I read all these books from Walter Russell, and I say, Ellen, this is the real stuff. This guy is totally on. He goes, you really think so? Well, too bad he's dead. She used to donate a lot of the money to pay him. Like he'd have to buy these giant marble things he could make into statues. And she would pay for that. He'd buy his art. She had art in her house from him. And it was like, Walter Russell? Yeah, but I don't like his wife, just like she didn't like Mark Prophet's wife. And so she says, why? You're impressed by that? Well, let me call her now and we'll go up and visit. So she calls up Lau Russell and we go up to Waynesboro, Virginia, wherever it was. Here's this fantastic mansion. In the back is this kind of formal gardens with statues and everything, but it's like a tomb. It's like a ghost town. So I get to meet her. She likes me. She gives me a bunch of cool stuff, to read and stuff. Because later I'd go back and visit, and I always traveled in my Volkswagen van, and I could live out of it, put my curtains up. I'd just go to a library, and I would then study at the library and live out of my van. But anyway, she liked me. She wanted me to take over because there was nobody left. Nobody understood Walter Russell's fancy works, the Universal One particularly. And no one could come along and be a teacher, she asked me. And I said, no, I can't do that. I don't understand this. I don't get this. It was just like with macrobiotics. I couldn't understand what Michio Kushi was talking about with yin and yang. Every time he'd tell me something was yin and yang, I go, that doesn't make any sense. That's the opposite of what I would intuitively think. I could never get it. And with his Universal One, I couldn't get it. I'm not a mathematician or a geometry teacher. So anyway, I loved all that, and that was great. And then I had already read all of Edgar Casey's books that were there about. And so I noticed in Ellen's library the Casey books, and I say, oh, this is great stuff, but he's a psychic. I'm not impressed by psychics. Anybody can go into trance. I mean, he was a beautiful man because he read the Bible every year, and he was a great healer, probably the greatest psychic healer in history. But, I really, that's not quite my path. She goes, so you don't want to meet Hugh Lin? And I'm going, Hugh Lin? She goes, yes, I helped build the library next to the da-da-da, and I used to donate to what was called the hospital. It was really a hospital. And she used to go down there for the treatments in Virginia Beach, because in the sand, that's why Casey put his healing place there. You bury yourself in the sand, and there's so much gold in it that it heals you, supposedly. And they had a little hotel. She bought the hotel for them. It was actually a hotel with a restaurant. She bought that for them. She put up the library for them. So she says, oh, no, let's go. So we go there, and I get to meet all the fancy people there. And they, too, are like, we can't do that. It's kind of, they didn't say it, but it's like dead. But the Association for Research and Enlightenment is what it's called in Virginia Beach. And it is a great library of esoteric stuff, right? Amazing. But I had already found some Steiner books then, but they had a bunch of the Steiner books. So I stayed there and went back there many times and studied with them and, hung out with them. But the deal was they couldn't heal. Well, here's Casey. He could heal with these marvelous things. So they made all his medicaments, the old medicaments that used to be used, like in an old apothecary. And they still use today. They're some of the best things you can do. Some of the ideas he had for health, fantastic. But I'm looking to get healed. So what happens? Then I find out while I'm there, and Ellen didn't know anything about this, that every time I'd meet one of these people, I'd look at him and I go, you have a funny black box in your house. They'd say, how do you know that? It was illegal at that time to have radionics machines, which I called black boxes because they literally are black boxes and they are magic. And no one to this day can explain why they work. But anyway, I kept meeting these people there. Every time I'd be there, I'd meet another person. They'd take me to their house. They'd show me one of these machines. And it takes a psychic to run it. So they had purchased a terribly expensive machine from England, from the Delaware Labs or from, what was his name, Albert Abrams, or some of them had Ruth Drown machines, the great radionics healer who died in jail. They locked people up for this, okay? And these were black magic. People thought this was black magic. These were black boxes. And I'm saying, no, if this can heal, let me check it out. So they have a little pad on them, sometimes rubber, sometimes wood. And the operator has to sit there and dial 9 dials. And they eventually use psychics to figure out if you have cancer of this, then the number on the 9 dials is going to be this. You dial it up and you can put something to heal it in this, what they call the well, this hole over here, this little thing. So you put what you're going to send to them that, and then you send it to them, or you send it just the vibration, but you can diagnose and you can heal with this. And I thought this was the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, I remember one time I was with John Davey, head of Emerson College, and we were talking about radionics, and he started talking about he knew he was drowned, and that's a whole interesting story. And you knew John Davey, he's of course the son of Charles Davey, prominent anthroposophist, and but Walter Russell is interesting, and I don't think people realize, but what happened to him is when he was young, he went into what's we've called enlightenment, cosmic consciousness, as people would tend to call it back then. And when he came out, he knew architecture, mathematics, sculpture, painting. He just started doing it all, and without the training. And he ended up becoming a member of what was formerly the Twilight Club that was started by Ralph Waldo Emerson and Bronson Alcott and the Transcendentalists up in the Boston area, that changed into the really the place in which Walter Russell would meet with people like Watson from IBM and Carpenter and all these really interesting people during his period of time. And Walter Russell had some interesting buildings that he built in New York that are, for the most part, no longer standing, but you can find pictures of them. But he's a real the Universal One is to a large extent a study of vortical activity, and from C.G. Harrison, all nature is vortical. It's the way C.G. Harrison describes it, and Rudolf Steiner concurs. Just to give you some things to think about, we're starting to run out of time. So unless you want to put another leg on your story.
Well, let me just add something about radionics. I started working with these machines, and I found that they were very powerful, and that it had a long history of creating these books, big books with all the numbers, and everybody was all into the numbers and dial up on the rheostat and heal them. And then a guy named Galen Hieronymus started using it for agriculture, and that's when people saw that it really worked. You'd take a picture, you'd put it on it. He would send the what the crops needed, and they'd take a picture, aerial picture, and they'd mark it out. The area that he had treated was fine. Everything around it wasn't. So he had demonstrated again and again that this worked. And so he had a friend, Peter Kelly, and Brian Lynch, our dear friend, introduced me to Peter Kelly, went down to his place, and he had collected every one of these machines, even the time machine. We can talk about that next episode. But Peter Kelly, when he met me, because I could work these machines, he loved me. He'd say, check this out. I got this thing. No one's been able to make it work. And I said, oh, let me try it. And I'd stroke my face. He'd go, snap, snap, snap. You'd hear it snap. It'd stick to it when you got to the right thing. That's how you knew it was working. You'd stroke it and it went snap. That's it. And so he tested me. We worked on things. When he died, we were working on a way to take 3 Tesla inventions, which then I did create the cube, which is pretty much the same thing. But he wanted to be able to project gamma waves to people so that they could go into the super learning state. And that's what he was working on. He understood Tesla, he understood all the radionics, he understood David Tansley's radiesthesia, all that stuff. So I got to work with him. He created then the Beitar machine, which is still used today. And it's absolutely amazing. It's a way to balance your chakras, and literally people who are on heroin go in, they do one treatment, they walk out, they're fine. Same thing with alcoholics, all kinds of stuff. So he created this super machine called the Beitar, and then I think someone else got a hold of it. But he was down in Georgia, and so I visited him once with Brian, and then I went back a few times, and then I kept always in contact with him until he died. and was able, even over the phone sometimes, to help him with whatever he was working on, because he was a master at this. But the deal is, guess what? It's all true, but so what? It doesn't mean that you're not going to get healed unless you're ready to be healed. And a healer can't heal you if they don't have a conscience and the ability to reach into the spiritual world. And that's what you're doing when you're stroking that pad. You're asking the spiritual world, yes or no. That's all you're asking them. And it gives the answer, yes or no. Well, that's like flipping a coin. Matter of fact, at Creative Health Institute, Farmer Don was he grew all the wheatgrass for Ann Wigmore. I mean, the wheat that was turned into wheatgrass. And he used a radionics device. He used a dowsing device, but he was so amazing at it. And I have friends who do this. That kind of thing is using them as the pendulum. They may have a pendulum in their hand, but I don't care. It isn't the pendulum talking, it's them. So I said, I don't need an extension. I don't need a black box to do this stuff. If I can look at a person and see what their illness is, why do I need to dial it up on 9 rheostats? Why don't I just do it? But next time, because I mentioned it, we can start off with the Radionics time machines, because those have already proven themselves to be such an amazing thing that when they're talking about the looking glass, when they're talking about what are they called, the stargates, when they're talking about multi-dimensions going back for, they are talking about a radionics device created by Delaware in England that Delaware couldn't. Oh, by the way, Delaware made all these machines, but his wife was the psychic. He was useless without his wife. Peter Kelly had all these machines, couldn't work them. He didn't have the psychic. Galen Hieronymus made it so that you didn't really have to have a person in the middle. And he made it so you could just, if you knew what you were going after, you could just ray it out to them. And now I got one right over there in the corner. I got a couple of them. They're biofeedback machines, right? And they can help a little bit, but it's the operator. It's an interface between the conscience of the operator and the spiritual world. And if you want to think that you're some fantastic healer because you can use a machine to heal people, I'm sorry, that's very mix of Luciferic pride and Ahrimanic machinations. So next time we can go a little bit further with that, just for a minute, and then go on next to once I got out of the military, then I became the wild man that John Barnwell met, because at that point I became like a hypercholeric and went around so fast that I never ever slowed down. So we can talk about that next time.
Well, excellent. Yeah, you have to keep in mind that our trajectory here is always regarding Jesus Christ and his words that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that there's a certain resonance there of love, that it's basically the path of healing through love. But what's required of the individual is that they participate of their own free will and accord. And so the energy that they've developed of their own personal path becomes the canvas on which the Christ divine spiritual forces can utilize to become something greater than it was before. And so I just so nobody's confused as to what we're discussing here. Mm-hmm. And this is a remarkable journey here. And of course, it's the brainchild of the industrious Tyler Gabriel, who thought it'd be a good idea we had this conversation. And I'm so glad she did. And so with that being said, I want to give everybody the best and remind them to bless their food, bless their day, and thank the Lord for putting you in a situation to where you have the freedom to be able to come to his teachings and will.
Thank you, John.